I climbed to the top of the world on my own, driven by ambition. Then, in a ruthless toss of red wine at a glittering conference, a billionaire heir called me "little trash CEO" and ruined my life's work. But that humiliation couldn't break me. It ignited a fire that burned down his entire empire and the shadows pulling his strings. Welcome to Melina's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single comment, and it helps me to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Michaela Reyes. They call me Mika. I grew up in the slums, the daughter of a fisherman lost at sea, and a mother who scrubbed the floors of the wealthy so I could eat. I went to school barefoot, studied under streetlights, sold fish at dawn to buy a broken computer, and taught myself programming from library books I couldn't afford to photocopy. Today, I am 37, the CEO of SolariTech, a company that locks sunlight in a box so that even the poorest homes never have to sit in darkness. I still wear the faded seashell and fishing line bracelet my mother made. Silk still feels like a lie on my skin. 3 nights ago, at the Grand Climate Conference in Geneva, I presented my new solar battery, 7 days of stored sunlight fabricated in a warehouse that used to sell fish. As the final slide showed children swimming in water that was now polluted, Marcus Stonehaven, the heir to the Stonehaven fortune, walked to my table, tilted his glass, and poured red wine over 3 years of work. Then he smiled for the cameras and said, loud enough for the world to hear, "Little trash CEO, go back to the slums where you belong." The room erupted in laughter. The old men in tuxedos applauded as if it were theater. I knelt, wiping the wine with the hem of the simple blue dress my mother made before she passed, and looked up. In Marcus's eyes, I saw terror, not hatred. His lips mouthed silent words. "I'm sorry. They made me do it." Behind him, his mother stood beneath the family portrait, an antique phone pressed to her ear, smiling the way a cat smiles when the cage door clangs shut. I stood up, rolled up the soaked blueprint, and said into the microphone, "As of this moment, the Stonehaven Group has lost a $650 million contract with SolariTech. I don't need your respect. I will take the truth instead." Marcus screamed 4 words as security dragged him away. "Mika, it wasn't me!" I walked out into the Swiss night, clutching the stained paper to my chest. The wine was only the first drop. The rest of their blood would follow. The glass had already shattered. The red wine ran across my blueprint like a fresh wound, and the laughter of 500 rich people pressed against my ears like hot iron. I knelt on the cold marble, the hem of my simple blue dress soaking up the spill. My fingers found the corner of the paper first, then the little bracelet on my wrist, the one my mother knotted from fishing line and broken shells the year the sea took my father. The shells were almost white now, worn smooth by years of my nervous thumb. I needed to feel something that was still mine. I wiped slowly, carefully, the way I once wiped my little brother's tears when the other children threw stones because we smelled of fish. The wine would not come out. It only spread deeper, turning my careful lines into rivers of blood. That was when I saw her. One pale hand held an old telephone, real gold, real cord, the kind nobody uses anymore except for show. Her lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. She was looking straight at Marcus while she spoke into that phone, and the smile grew wider with every second that the room laughed at me. I knew that kind of smile. I saw it once on the face of the woman who owned the big house where my mother cleaned floors. She smiled the same way the day she told my mother we could no longer bring my little brother inside, even to wait on the porch, because the neighbors complained about those kind of children. This woman's smile was not contempt. Contempt would have been cleaner. This was pleasure. The pleasure of someone who had just pulled a string and watched the puppet dance exactly as planned. Marcus was still standing over me, breathing hard, his face the color of ash. 2 men in black suits had already taken his arms, pulling him backward, but his eyes stayed on mine. I saw his mouth form the same silent words again. I am sorry. They made me. I followed his gaze upward. The family portrait showed all the Stonehavens arranged like saints. Old Reginald Stonehaven in the center, dead 10 years but still watching. His wife beside him, pearls tight around her throat. The sons, the daughters. And there, almost hidden in the shadows at the edge, the woman in silk. In the painting, she was younger, softer, but the eyes were the same. Cold. Waiting. I stood up. The ruined blueprint dripped in my hands. The laughter quieted just enough for people to hear their own cruelty echo back. I walked to the microphone, my wet shoes leaving small red prints on the marble like breadcrumbs. Every camera turned to me. I looked at the woman in silk first. She lifted one perfect eyebrow, still smiling. The laughter still rang in the hall like broken bells, but I was already somewhere else. My knees were wet with wine, my beautiful blueprint ruined, the woman in silk watching me with that terrible, satisfied smile. I rose slowly, the soaked paper heavy in my hands, and walked to the podium as if the floor was made of the same hot sand I walked barefoot as a child. The bracelet on my wrist, fishing line and tiny shells, felt suddenly tight, like it was reminding me, you have survived worse than this. I placed the bleeding blueprint on the lectern so every camera could drink in the red ruin. Then I looked straight into the lenses, straight into the eyes of the world that had always looked down on me. $650 million, I said, my voice soft but steady, the way my mother spoke when she had no more tears left. That is what the Stonehaven group believed my people's future was worth. Tonight they showed me the price of their trust, one glass of wine and a room full of laughter. I lifted the ruined paper higher. I cancel the contract, effective now. Solaritech will not sell even 1 watt of sunlight to people who measure human dignity in crystal and red wine. A woman near the front gasped so loud her pearls shook. Someone shouted that I was insane. The old men who had clapped when Marcus humiliated me now turned purple with rage. Good. Let them feel something real for once. I kept speaking, softer still, so they had to lean in. You think privilege protects you. You think money makes you untouchable. But justice, mothers, justice has its own price, and it is always paid in truth. I will pay that price gladly. I will prove that truth is heavier than all your gold. The room exploded. Reporters surged forward. Security tried to reach me. I stepped back from the podium, the wet blueprint pressed to my heart like a wounded bird. That was when I heard the struggle behind me. Marcus was fighting the 2 men dragging him toward the private exit. His perfect hair had fallen across his forehead, his tie crooked like a child after a nightmare. He twisted hard, almost broke free, and for 1 second, his eyes found mine across the chaos. His mouth opened. No sound reached me at first, only the shape of my name. Mika. The men yanked him harder. One covered his mouth, but not before the last words tore free, raw and desperate. It wasn't me. The door slammed. The sound cut the air like a knife. Silence fell for 1 heartbeat. Then the laughter came back louder, crueler, because now they thought they had won twice, once by breaking my work, once by silencing the man who tried to speak. I stood very still in the middle of all that noise, the wine cooling on my skin, the bracelet cutting into my wrist. Something shifted inside me the way the tide shifts before the storm no one sees coming. Because mothers, you know this feeling. When someone hurts your child and then dares to cry that they had no choice. When the powerful say, "It wasn't me," while the blood is still warm on their hands. I looked one last time at the woman in silk. She was no longer smiling. She was already walking away, the antique phone pressed to her ear, speaking quickly to someone I could not see. I folded the ruined blueprint carefully, the way I once folded my mother's body into the only good dress we owned before they closed the coffin. Then I walked out past the cameras, past the reaching hands, past the laughter that sounded smaller with every step. Behind me, the Stonehaven dynasty was already celebrating the death of a poor girl's dream. The plane landed at dawn. I walked out of the airport still smelling of wine and marble floors, the ruined blueprint folded inside my jacket like a dead child. My phone began to burn before I even reached the car. First came the headlines, one after another, like bullets fired in perfect rhythm. CEO raised from trash throws tantrum, loses $650 million deal. Little trash, CEO proves she belongs in the garbage. From slums to stage, how one woman's hysteria cost investors billions. They used childhood pictures someone dug up. Me at 9 years old, barefoot, holding a fish almost bigger than my body, smiling with missing teeth. They circled the holes in my dress and wrote "future failure" in red. My mother's face was blurred, thank God, but I still felt her shame through the screen. By the time I reached my small apartment, the sun was already high and cruel. I made coffee with shaking hands, sat at the kitchen table that still has the burn mark from when I was learning to solder circuits at 14, and opened my laptop. 47 emails from the financial advisors, all with the same subject line: urgent, your immediate resignation required. I opened the first one. It was signed by all 5 senior partners, men I had met in person, men who smiled at me last month and called me the future of clean energy. Dear Ms. Reyes, your emotional outburst at the climate conference has caused irreparable damage to shareholder confidence. Clients are withdrawing commitments. The board has lost faith in your leadership. For the continued survival of SolariTech, we strongly recommend your immediate resignation. Further refusal will force us to take protective measures for the company you claim to love. It was signed with their full names and titles, cold as a coffin lid. I read it twice. Then I read the next 46. Same words copied and pasted like they had all received the same script. My chest hurt the way it hurt the day they told me my mother died alone while I was at a university competition I could not miss. I scrolled to the very bottom of the last email, past the legal signatures, past the threats dressed as concern. There was a line of text so small I almost missed it. Gray letters on gray background, the kind of thing only someone who grew up fixing broken computers would notice. A string of numbers and letters. I copied it, pasted it into my decoder. My fingers remembered the motions from nights when electricity was only 4 hours and I had to work fast. The text that appeared made the room tilt. Do not let her near the coast. The welder talks too much. I stared at the words, realizing this was not the handwriting of the financial advisors, but a hidden message added after their signatures. Someone knew I would go home and exactly where I would go next. Someone was afraid of an old welder who hadn't spoken to a reporter in 20 years. I slowly closed the laptop. The bracelet on my wrist felt heavier than ever. I remembered Marcus screaming, "It wasn't me," and the woman in silk smiling as she talked into the dead phone. And now, this hidden message told someone to keep me away from my own people. I stood up. My feet were steady. The trembling had stopped. I put the laptop and the stained blueprint into the bag, the one my mother sewed. Then I walked out the door without locking it. There was nothing left inside worth stealing. I realized the real war had moved inside my own house. Someone I paid to protect SolariTech was selling every piece of my soul while pretending to save the company. I got into the old Jeep I still drive. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I aimed it toward the coast, toward the poisoned water, toward the man they were afraid I would meet. They could write whatever they wanted about the trash. I was going home to dig up the truth myself. And whatever was lurking beneath those emails was about to learn that some kids who grow up hungry never forget how to bite back. The road to the coast was the same one I walked barefoot as a child, only now it was cracked asphalt and dying palms. The air smelled of rust and dead fish. Per hour, the radio spat new poison. Little trash CEO flees to her slum after mental breakdown. I turned it off. The silence was better. I reached the old welding yard just as the sun bled into the sea. The gates were chained, but the chain was new, shining like a threat. A sign read, "Danger. Stonehaven property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." 10 years ago, children played here. Now even the dogs had left. I parked the Jeep, took the ruined blueprint and the bracelet that never leaves my wrist, and walked through a gap in the fence like I still belonged here. Because I do. The house of McDougal sat at the far end, half swallowed by sand. One light burned inside, yellow and weak. I knocked with the same rhythm my mother taught me. 3 soft, 2 strong, so neighbors would know it was family. The curtain moved. A man's shape, tall, shoulders bent by years of carrying other people's steel. Then the door opened only the width of the chain. Mac's face appeared in the gap. Older than I remembered, hair white as salt, eyes the color of a storm that never quite arrives. "I have nothing for reporters," he said, voice like gravel dragged across iron. "I am not a reporter, Mang Mac. It is Michaela, daughter of Letitia, who used to bring you fish when your wife was sick." His eyes narrowed. He looked at my simple cotton dress, my dusty sandals, the bracelet made of fishing line and broken shells. "You are the CEO now," he said, and the word CEO came out like a curse. "All CEOs are the same. You come with promises, you leave with our blood in your pockets. Go home, little girl." He started to close the door. I put my hand against it. Not pushing, just resting. The way you rest your hand on a frightened animal. "I came home with nothing, Mang Mac. They took the contract. They took my name. They poured wine on the only clean thing I ever built. All I have left is this." I held up the soaked blueprint, now stiff with dried red, and the memory of how the water used to taste before Stonehaven killed it. Something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, maybe. Memory. "I do not ask you to trust a CEO," I said softly. "I ask you to trust the girl who used to fall asleep under your welding table because the light was warm and my mother was late coming home." The chain was still there. The door didn't open. A few minutes passed, the crickets started chirping, and I turned away. My shadow stretched across the sand, gaunt and tired. I was almost at the gap in the fence when I heard the chain drop and slow footsteps. I stopped, but didn't turn around. Mac stood in his broken window looking out at the polluted sea. He said nothing, just raised his hand. In his hand was a small, old, scratched black USB stick wrapped twice in electrical tape. He held it up between 2 fingers, steady. My heart was beating too loudly. I walked back slowly. The night smelled of salt, rust, and something distant burning. When I reached the window, he still had not spoken. He only looked at me for a long time, searching my face the way you search the sea for a boat that never comes back. Then he placed the USB in my palm and closed my fingers over it himself. His hand was warm, calloused, trembling just once. "This is only the first piece," I whispered. "There will be more pain before there is light." He nodded once. "I waited 20 years for someone to come without a suit and a lie. Be careful, Michaela. They already know you are here." I closed my fist around the small black stick. It weighed nothing and everything. Behind us, the moon rose over water that used to shine like silver and now only reflected oil. I smiled at him, small and fierce. "Then let them come," I said. "I am done running." Max stepped back into the shadows of his house. The light went out. I walked to my Jeep holding the USB against my heart, right where the wine stain still lived on the blueprint. I drove through the night with Mac's USB burning a hole in my pocket and the taste of salt still on my tongue. When I reached the small rented room above the old market, the one I keep so no one can ever say I forgot where I came from, I locked the door, pushed the table against the wall, and plugged the stick into my oldest laptop, the one that still runs on hope and tape. Files opened like wounds. Hundreds of documents, fake permits, bribes disguised as consulting fees, photographs of dead coral that used to be rainbow, and one video file marked only with a date from last year. I clicked it with fingers that would not stop shaking. The screen filled with Marcus Stonehaven. Not the golden man from the conference, perfect suit, perfect cruelty. This Marcus sat in a dark office, tie loosened, face wet with tears. The camera was hidden, probably in a smoke detector. His voice came out broken, almost a whisper. "Please," he begged someone off screen. "I did what you asked. I delayed the new emissions report. I paid the inspectors. Just leave my daughter alone. She is only 12. Whatever you want next, I will do it. I swear on my life, do not touch my family." A shadow moved across the wall behind him. No face, only a gloved hand placing a photograph on the desk. I could not see what was in the picture, but Marcus made a sound like an animal being skinned alive. "I understand," he sobbed. "I will make sure the coastal project dies. I will make sure the girl from the slums never gets another contract. Just give me the guarantee in writing that my children are safe." The gloved hand slid a single sheet of paper toward him. Marcus signed it without reading. His tears fell on the ink. The video ended. I sat in the dark for a long time, the bracelet cutting into my wrist because my fist was so tight. The fan turned slowly above me, pushing warm air around like lies. Marcus crying, Marcus begging, Marcus selling my people's future to save his child. Part of me wanted to feel triumph. See, even the prince is only a puppet. But mothers, you know this pain. When the one who hurt you is also bleeding, the knife in your hand suddenly feels heavier. My phone lit up with messages I had been ignoring. The legal team had called an emergency meeting at dawn. I went because I still believed in rules, even when they were written by people who never had to follow them. They waited for me in the glass conference room that smells of lemon polish and fear. 5 lawyers, 3 from the most expensive firm in the capital. Their faces were gray. "Michaela," the oldest one started, using my name like a warning. "We have run the numbers. Stonehaven will bury us in motions. Discovery alone will cost $40 million we do not have. Their legal team outnumbers us 50-1. If we file this lawsuit, SolariTech goes bankrupt in 6 months. Every worker loses their job. Every village waiting for our batteries stays dark. You will destroy the very people you claim to protect." He pushed a thick report across the table, graphs falling like cliffs, red everywhere. "Sign the withdrawal," he said softly. "Walk away. Live to fight another day." I looked at every one of them, good people who also had families. I opened the laptop and showed them the video without saying a word. Marcus cried and pleaded. When the video ended, the room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioner breathing. One junior lawyer started to cry. The oldest one finally spoke. "So he's a monster who has a kid. It doesn't change anything. The war still costs money we don't have." I closed the laptop. "I built this company on kitchen tables with parts I found in trash," I said. "I will not let it die on marble tables because we are afraid of monsters." "But Michaela," another pleaded, "justice without power is only noise. Then we will make noise loud enough to wake the dead," I said. I walked to the window. Below us, the city glittered, wealthy and cruel. Somewhere out there, Marcus was tucking his daughter into bed, terrified of the shadows I couldn't yet name. I was faced with 2 choices: fight and SolariTech collapses, thousands of people losing everything I promised, or back down, and the poison continues to flow into the water my people drink. Both paths bled. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The choice was not over. It sat in my chest like a stone too heavy to swallow, too sharp to spit out. The night after seeing Marcus beg for his daughter's life, I did not sleep. I sat on the floor with the USB files spread around me like broken glass and made my choice. At dawn, I showered, put on the same blue cotton dress now washed clean of wine, and walked into SolariTech headquarters carrying the lawsuit papers I had signed myself. The press room was already full. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions about my sanity, my childhood, my right to even stand there. I ignored them all. I placed Mac's evidence folder on the table and looked straight into the lenses. Today, SolariTech files suit against the Stonehaven Group for 23 years of environmental crimes against my people, I said, voice calm, the way the sea is calm before it swallows ships. We will prove they poisoned our water, falsified reports, and paid bribes to keep the truth buried. This is no longer about one contract. This is about justice. I went straight to the executive floor to tell the board in person. My hand touched the cold metal handle of the meeting room door. I took one breath that tasted of rust and salt and every promise I ever made to my mother. I pushed the door open. They were already waiting. All 11 board members sat around the long table like judges at an execution. The chairman, Mr. Delgado, a man who cried when I first gave him shares because his granddaughter could finally have light for homework, did not look at me. Papers were stacked in front of every seat. A single red folder lay open at the head of the table. The word removal was stamped across it in thick black letters. The door clicked shut behind me. The sound was very small, but it felt final. "Michaela," Mr. Delgado said without raising his eyes. "By Emergency Clause 14B of the company charter, we are calling an immediate vote to remove you as CEO, effective now. Your actions have endangered the entire company. Stock is down 29%. 3 major investors have withdrawn. You have disrupted the market." He finally looked up. His eyes were red, not from anger, from shame. I stood very still. The bracelet felt suddenly hot against my skin. "You waited until I declared war to remember the charter," I said softly. One of the younger members, Anna, the only other woman, would not meet my gaze. Her fingers worried the corner of the red folder like a child caught stealing. "We gave you every chance," Mr. Delgado continued, voice cracking. "You left us no choice." I looked at each face I had fought beside for 8 years. People who toasted with cheap wine the night we powered the first village. People who called me daughter when my own mother died. Now they sat ready to cut my throat to save their own. I took one step forward. My shadow fell across the table like spilled ink. "So this is how it happens," I said. "The girl from the slums dares to bite the hand that pretended to feed her, and suddenly the rules remember how to bleed." Mr. Delgado lifted the gavel he had never used before. It looked ridiculous in his shaking hand. "All in favor of immediate dismissal. Do what you must," I said, "but know this. The war started the moment you chose fear over children drinking poison." I turned to leave. My hand was already on the door again when Mr. Delgado spoke one last time, almost a whisper. "Michaela, there are things bigger than both of us." I did not turn around. "I know," I said. "That is why I am still walking forward." The hallway outside was cold and empty. My footsteps echoed like gunshots. Behind that door, they thought they had stopped me. The board took my title, my office, my keys. They even took the small plant I kept on the windowsill because it was company property. I walked out with only the clothes on my back, the bracelet on my wrist, and Mac's USB in my pocket. The security guard who used to call me Hija could not look at me. That night, I drove back to the coast. The moon was thin and sharp, like a blade someone forgot to hide. Mac was waiting on his porch, sitting on an old plastic chair that creaked under his weight. A single bulb burned above the door, attracting moths that died against the light. I sat on the step without asking. My knees were still trembling from the day. "They threw me out," I said. My voice sounded small, the way it sounded when I was 7 and told the teacher my mother could not come to the meeting because she was cleaning someone else's house. Mac only nodded. He had expected it. I took out the USB. "I need to understand everything that is inside this before they bury me completely." He stood up slowly, bones cracking like dry wood, and led me inside. The house smelled of coffee and rust. On the table lay tools, wires, an old welding mask with a crack across the glass. He plugged the USB into a dusty laptop that wheezed when it started. Files opened one by one. First came the forged emissions reports, stamped with Stonehaven seals. Then the payments, millions moving like dirty water through shell companies. Matt clicked deeper. A folder marked only with numbers. Inside was a single spreadsheet. Columns of dates, amounts, account numbers. Every payment linked back to one offshore brokerage firm in the Caymans, Meridian Trust Limited. Mac's finger stopped on the screen. "This is new," he said quietly. 2 years ago, the money went to politicians, inspectors, easy dogs to feed. Now everything flows here. Faster. Bigger. Someone changed the rules. I leaned closer. The bracelet pressed against the table edge. The last entry was only 3 weeks old. $50 million. Destination, Meridian Trust. "That is more than Stonehaven makes in profit some years," I whispered. Matt closed the laptop. The room went dark except for the bulb outside. "They are not hiding anymore," he said. "They are preparing for something large." He sat again, heavy. Then he did something I had never seen a grown man do in front of me. He rolled up his sleeve and showed me his left hand. A thick white scar ran from wrist to knuckles, ugly and deliberate. "3 months ago, 2 men came at night," he said. "They held this hand to the table and told me to stop sending letters to regulators. They said next time they would take fingers instead of skin." His voice stayed flat. "They told me to remember who really runs things now." I reached out without thinking and touched the scar. It was warm, alive. "I am only a welder, Michaela," he said. "They threatened to hurt me, but the one truly hurt is someone within the Stonehaven family itself." He looked at me then, eyes suddenly ancient. "Marcus is not the one giving orders anymore. Someone inside his own house is bleeding him to feed this new beast. And whatever they are planning next, it will make the poison in our water look like rain." He closed my fingers over the USB again, gentle, like handing over a child. "I gave you the pieces I could carry," he whispered. "The last piece is locked behind blood and fear. Even I do not know where it is hidden." The board took my title, but they could not take the people who still believed Light was worth fighting for. That night, 5 of them came to the coastal warehouse, where Mac kept his welding tools and I kept my oldest computers. 5 engineers, 2 accountants who refused to sign the dismissal papers, and 1 quiet lawyer who carried her own laptop like a shield. We pushed tables together under a single bulb, the same way we once built the first battery prototype when we had nothing but hope and borrowed electricity. Max sat at the end, scar glowing white under the light. I opened his files on 3 screens at once. Lines of numbers crawled like ants. We worked in silence at first. Coffee went cold. Someone's child slept on a pile of rice sacks in the corner. The first discovery came at midnight. One accountant traced a payment loop. Stonehaven money leaving a Manila bank, bouncing through 3 shell companies, landing in Meridian Trust in the Caymans. Classic laundering. We celebrated with 1 shared cigarette passed hand to hand. By 3 in the morning, we had mapped 37 transactions, all signed by Marcus, all dated after the video where he cried for his daughter. The amounts grew larger each month, like a monster learning to eat faster. Then the youngest engineer, Carlo, only 24 and still believing in heroes, found the hidden folder. It was encrypted with a key only I would recognize, my mother's birthday backward. Mac looked away when I typed it. He had known. Inside was a single blockchain ledger. We followed the trail. 1 transaction stood alone at the bottom, dated 3 days ago. $280 million. The sender was Stonehaven Energy Holdings. The receiver was a cryptocurrency wallet address 42 characters long. Carlo ran the address through every public explorer. Nothing. No name, no exchange. The coins had vanished into cold storage the moment they arrived. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. $280 million was more than Stonehaven had in liquid reserves. Marcus was draining his own empire to feed something that left no footprint. Mac finally spoke. "That is not Marcus anymore," he said. "That is someone using his hand to sign while they hold the knife at his throat." The lawyer closed her laptop slowly. "Without the receiving key, we cannot prove where it went. We have smoke, Michaela, but no fire." I looked at each tired face around the table. Faces that had families waiting at home, faces that could still lose everything. I touched the bracelet on my wrist, the broken shells warm now from my skin. "Then we keep hunting," I said, "because someone out there is laughing while Marcus bleeds, and that someone thinks we are too small to follow the blood." Outside, the sea kept its ancient rhythm against poisoned rocks. Inside, the screens glowed cold and blue. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived wrapped in a heat so thick it felt like walking through wet cotton. And when I entered the old colonial courthouse with its peeling ceiling fans and smell of mildew mixed with fear, I carried nothing but the folder Mac had guarded with his blood and the bracelet my mother had knotted the year the sea took my father. Reporters crowded the corridor, their cameras flashing like knives. Yet I kept my eyes forward because I knew that every step I took inside that building was a step closer to the moment when contempt would finally meet its mirror. Judge Helena Vargas presided from a bench carved when my grandmothers were still girls. Her white hair pulled back severely and her gaze sharp enough to cut through every lie ever told in that room. Stonehaven had sent an army of lawyers in charcoal suits, 12 in total, while I stood alone at the plaintiff's table because the board had stripped me of counsel, along with everything else. When the clerk called my name, I rose slowly, feeling the broken shells of my bracelet press into my wrist like tiny warnings. "Your Honor," I began, laying out the evidence with hands that refused to tremble. For more than 2 decades, the Stonehaven Group knowingly dumped toxins into the water that feeds my village, falsified every emissions report, bribed inspectors, and now we can prove that hundreds of millions of dollars flowed from their accounts into hidden channels, the largest transfer being $280 million only weeks ago, money that vanished into a cryptocurrency wallet no public ledger can trace. I placed the blockchain printouts, the forged permits, the Meridian Trust records, and finally the screenshot of that untraceable address in front of her. Each page, a stone in the path I had walked barefoot to reach this moment. Judge Vargas turned the pages with the patience of someone who had already read the ending, and when she finally removed her glasses, the silence in the courtroom became so complete that I heard the distant cry of gulls through the open windows. She looked not at the papers, but directly into my eyes, and what I saw there was not anger, not dismissal, but something far worse, recognition. "Miss Reyes," she said, her voice carrying the weight of every verdict she had ever delivered. "You have shown money leaving the Stonehaven Empire and disappearing into shadow, yet you have not shown where it arrived, who received it, or why it was sent. Without the final destination, this court cannot establish criminal intent beyond reasonable doubt, and therefore your motion to proceed to full trial is denied for insufficient evidence." I took one step closer to the bench. "Your Honor, children are growing tumors because of what that money bought. Give us discovery and we will follow the trail to its end." Judge Vargas leaned forward slightly, close enough that only I and the trembling court reporter could hear what she said next, and when the words left her mouth, they carried the same venom Marcus had used in Geneva. Yet now, they were wrapped in sorrow. "Little trash CEO," she whispered, "you brought half the truth. The other half will destroy the things you are trying to protect." The gavel fell like a coffin lid. I stood frozen while reporters surged around me, their questions crashing like waves against a body that no longer knew how to swim. Half the truth. She had spoken it as warning, not insult, which meant she already knew whose hand guided the invisible wallet, and that knowledge terrified her more than any threat Stonehaven money could buy. As I walked out past the cameras and the laughter that tasted exactly like spilled wine, I understood at last that the missing half was not hidden in servers or offshore accounts. The morning after Judge Vargas closed the door on justice, the storm broke all at once, as if someone far away had given a single silent command, and every weapon aimed at us fired at the same moment. I woke to my phone screaming with notifications, each one a fresh wound. My old home address in the slums published on every major news site beside childhood photographs of me barefoot and hungry, McDougal's full name, and the exact location of his coastal house, posted on dark forums with promises of reward for anyone who taught the old welder to stay quiet. And worst of all, Celeritech's core battery management firmware suddenly rewriting itself on every test unit we still possessed, turning our greatest invention into useless, overheating bricks. By the time I reached the warehouse, my remaining team stood around the tables like survivors after a bombing, faces pale under the swinging bulb, while lines of malicious code scrolled across every screen in angry red. Carlo, the youngest, kept refreshing the news and reading aloud in a voice that cracked with every sentence. Disgraced former CEO endangers thousands of jobs. Whistleblower linked to communist cells. Solaritech technology fails spectacularly in field tests. Each headline landed like a slap. Max stood in the doorway, arms folded tight across his chest, watching the street because strangers had already driven past, twice asking questions in accents that did not belong to fishermen. When he spoke, his words came slow and heavy, the way thunder comes before the lightning finally strikes. They are not even hiding anymore, Michaela. They want us to feel the knife before they twist it. I sat at the largest monitor and began pulling the corrupted firmware apart line by line, searching for the signature the way a mother searches a crowd for her lost child. The attack was elegant, ruthless. It had entered through an update server we thought was air-gapped, rewrote the low-level controllers so the batteries would overcharge and explode under load, and then erased its own footprints with military precision. Hours bled away, while the sea outside turned the color of dried blood in the sunset. At midnight, I found it. A single fragment of injected code, only 12 lines long, written in a style I had never seen inside any Stonehaven system. The comments were in Cyrillic mixed with Korean characters, and the obfuscation technique belonged to a ghost group that sold zero-day exploits to governments who denied they existed. This was not Stonehaven's private security team throwing tantrums with hired hackers. This was international-grade warfare delivered through Stonehaven's hands but not paid for by Stonehaven's money. I leaned back so slowly the chair creaked like old bones, and when I spoke, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else entirely. The dynasty is only the mask now. Someone else is wearing their face, and whatever they are planning next will not stop at ruining reputations or frying batteries. Max stepped closer, the scar on his hand catching the light like a pale river. How long do we have? I looked at the scrolling logs, at the countdown timer someone had hidden inside the malicious update. Elegant and cruel. 48 hours until every Solaritech installation in the field received the same poisoned firmware. 48 hours until villages that had just received their first steady light in decades watched their hope literally burn. The freeze order arrived at 3:17 a.m., delivered by a courier in a government car who refused to look me in the eye. I signed for it with a hand that did not shake only because the bracelet on my wrist had gone cold as iron. When the door closed again, the warehouse was so quiet I heard the paper rustle as I opened it. Every account, every patent, every peso in petty cash, frozen. Reason, probable involvement in laundering of $280 million through unregistered cryptocurrency channels. I laughed once, a sound like breaking glass, and the team woke around me. Anna was first. Mika, what is it? Read it yourself, I said, handing her the pages. They used our own evidence. The wallet we were hunting just became the rope they hanged us with. Carlo took the document next, his voice rising. This is signed by Delgado, interim CEO Roberto Delgado. He was at my wedding, Mika. He danced with my mother. Max stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. How much time do we have before the banks open and the world sees? 4 hours, I answered. 4 hours until every supplier, every village, every mother waiting for light learns Solaritech is dead. I walked to the table where my oldest laptop still glowed, opened the folder I had not touched since Geneva, and pulled up the photograph. Marcus pouring wine, the ruined blueprint, and behind him, half hidden beneath the family portrait, the woman in silk with the antique phone pressed to her ear. I zoomed until only her face filled the screen. Evelyn Rothschild Kwan, Anna whispered, reading the caption I had added weeks ago when the name first surfaced. Ether Group's private counsel. She never appears in public unless the kill is already certain. Mac came closer. That is the woman from the conference? She was smiling while Marcus destroyed me, I said, and my voice finally broke. She knew exactly what he was going to do because she wrote the script, and now the board handed her the company on a silver platter. Carlo's fists clenched. So someone inside sold us. Someone I trusted with everything. I said, tasting blood where I had bitten my lip. Someone who cried when I gave him shares and called me the daughter he never had. Anna put her arms around me, but I stepped away. I could not bear kindness yet. I looked at each of them and felt the bottom fall out of the world I had built from nothing. Everything was gone. The company, the dream, the last safe place, and the person who delivered the final blow had once sat at my table and eaten rice from the same pot. I closed the laptop. The room went dark. In that darkness, I understood we had lost the war the moment someone inside our walls decided 30 pieces of silver were worth more than children breathing clean air. The rain had stopped, but the air inside the warehouse still felt wet with everything we had lost. I sat on the floor, back against a crate, the freeze order crumpled in my fist. The others had gone to find food, to breathe, to pretend there was still a tomorrow. Only Mac remained, cleaning his welding tools in the corner with the slow patience of a man who knows some things cannot be fixed. I opened the old email from the financial advisors, the one that had arrived the day they demanded my resignation, and stared again at the tiny gray line at the bottom. The base 64 string I had decoded weeks ago. Do not let her near the coast. The welder talks too much. That message, I said without looking up. You left it there on purpose. He did not answer at first, only the scrape of metal on metal. I left it where only you would find it, he said finally, voice low, almost shy. I knew if you ever saw it, you would understand the advisors were already bought. I wanted you to know who the real snake was before it bit you. I turned then. The bulb above him painted the scar on his hand silver. You played me from the beginning. I protected you the only way an old welder knows how, he answered. By leaving breadcrumbs, only the clever girl from the slums would follow. I opened the string again, but this time I did not stop at the warning. I kept digging, peeling layers the way I used to peel rusted circuit boards to find the last working chip. And there, buried 3 encryptions deeper, was another fragment, time-stamped the exact minute Marcus poured the wine in Geneva. A single line of plain text hidden inside the advisor's signature like a confession in a coffin. Subject was forced. Target, Reyes. Leverage, daughter, 12, boarding school, Lausanne. Handler, ERK. ERK Evelyn Rothschild Kwan, the woman in silk. My breath left me all at once. Marcus had not chosen to destroy me. Someone had put a gun to his child's future and told him to pull the trigger or watch her disappear. I opened the photograph on my phone, the one of the wine-stained blueprint, and zoomed until Marcus's face filled the frame. The terror I had mistaken for hatred was something else entirely, the look of a father who would burn the world to keep his daughter breathing. Mac came to stand behind me. I did not know everything, he said quietly. Only enough to keep you alive. The rest you had to find yourself. I touched the screen where Marcus's eyes looked back, wide and pleading. All this time I had treated him as the enemy, when he was just a father trying to save his child from monsters bigger than both of us. That realization hit harder than any betrayal. I decided I had to save him. I had to walk into the house of the man who called me trash, look him straight in the eye, and offer the very hand he tried to cut off. Because only Marcus knew where the Ether Group kept their real secrets, and only I could give him the one thing they had taken away, a chance to fight for his daughter without kneeling. I closed the phone and looked at Mac. Tomorrow, I said, we stop running. Tomorrow we go to Marcus. Mac nodded once, slow and certain. Then tomorrow, he answered, we start saving the devil so we can kill the devil behind him. I drove through the gates of the Stonehaven estate at dawn. Marcus stood on the top step in a silk robe the color of storm clouds, thinner than the man who had poured wine over my dreams. The skin beneath his eyes bruised violet, and when our gazes met across the gravel, he did not speak until the gates had closed behind me with the finality of a coffin lid. You are insane to come here, he said, voice rough from nights without sleep and days without hope. Every camera is watched by people who would kill us both before breakfast. I know who watches, I answered, and I know what they hold over you, Marcus. Your daughter is 12, and her name is Sophia, and she likes horses, and you would burn the world before you let them touch her." He flinched as though I had struck him across the face, then turned and led me through corridors lined with ancestors who had never gone hungry, past portraits whose eyes followed us like judges who had already delivered their verdict, until we reached a library where the fire had died hours ago, and the air tasted of cold ash and old money trying to hide its fear. When the heavy door closed behind us, he leaned against it, shoulders shaking. "If they see you here, they will make her disappear before sunset." "Then give me 10 minutes, I replied, placing Mac's black drive and the freeze order on the table between us. 10 minutes to show you that the only way Sophia ever sees 13 is if we cut the strings they tied around both our necks. He stared at the papers as though they might bite. "You think I have not tried? They own every account, every secret, every breath I am allowed to take." "They do not own the back door you left open 2 years ago," I said softly, "when you still believed you could run. Mac and I spent 3 sleepless nights rebuilding it from fragments you thought were deleted forever. Give me the master credentials, and we walk through together, you and I, 2 puppets who finally learned how to bite the hand that pulls us." Marcus closed his eyes so tightly the tears that had been waiting for months finally fell, and when he opened them again, the golden prince was gone, and only a terrified father remained. "If I do this, they will know within minutes. Your daughter will be on a fishing boat headed for my village before they finish their coffee," I promised, hearing the truth in my own voice the way my mother used to hear truth in prayer. "Mac is waiting with men who owe me their children's lives. No amount of ether money buys loyalty like that." He disappeared into the shadows and returned with a single sheet trembling in his hand, 12 handwritten words that opened the fortress everyone believed unbreakable. We moved to the hidden study behind the library, a windowless room built for secrets, and connected the laptops with a cable thin as a vein. My fingers remembered nights under streetlights, soldering circuits from trash, and the ether ledger opened like a dark flower, billions flowing through veins no regulator had ever seen, the poisoned wallet splitting and vanishing into trusts, inside trusts, until we reached the final gate and the screen glowed gentle red. "Authorization required. Family Trustee Level 5. Below it, Marcus Stonehaven, Trustee Level 4, access denied. The system locked with the politeness of a guillotine. Marcus made a sound I hope never to hear from another human again. "That level was created after my father died," he whispered. "Only one living person has it now." He did not need to speak the name. The final key belonged to someone who shared his blood, someone who had watched him break me in Geneva and smiled while the wine ran like blood across my blueprint. The traitor sat at his family table every Sunday. I closed the laptop slowly, feeling the weight of what came next settle on both our shoulders like a shroud. "Then the last piece," I said, "is not a password at all." Marcus met my eyes, and for the first time since the night he called me trash, we were not enemies. The final courtroom was not the same one where Judge Vargas had called me little trash CEO. This was the International Tribunal in The Hague. Marcus sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, no longer the Golden Prince, but a man who had lost everything except the daughter now safe in a small house by the sea. And when he looked at me, his eyes held neither hate nor fear, only the quiet gratitude of someone who had finally chosen to stand upright. The Ether Group's lawyers rose with the confidence of people who had never lost a case. But when I stood to speak, the room went still because the words I spoke were not mine alone. "Your Honors," I began, voice steady. "The Stonehaven dynasty poisoned my people for decades, yet the true architect of that poison was never Marcus Stonehaven. He was only the hand forced to hold the blade while Ether Group pulled the strings from the shadows." I placed the small black drive on the table, the same one Marcus had risked his life to give me, and connected it to the court's projector. The recording played, Marcus's voice cracking as he begged for his daughter's safety, the gloved hand sliding the photograph across the desk, the single sheet he signed with tears falling on the ink. Every word, every sob, every moment of terror was there, clear and undeniable. Marcus spoke next, voice low but carrying to the back of the room. I was blackmailed. I was threatened. I poured wine over Michaela Reyes's blueprint because they told me my daughter would disappear if I did not. Everything I did after that night was done under duress, and I am here today to testify against the real criminals. Evelyn stood, her smile thin as a knife. This is a forgery, Your Honors. The recording is manipulated, the threats unproven. But the evidence was already moving. The ledger we had pulled from Ether's own system, the $280 million traced through shell companies to numbered accounts controlled by Evelyn Rothschild Kwan herself, the biometric key held by Marcus's own mother who had sat in the gallery that day, wearing the same silver infinity pin I had seen in Geneva. When the bailiff placed the warrant before her, she did not stand, did not speak. She only looked at her son with eyes that held neither remorse nor love, only the cold certainty of someone who had believed money could buy eternity. The gavel fell. Ether Group was placed under immediate international investigation, its assets frozen worldwide. The Stonehaven dynasty collapsed within hours, shares worthless, board members fleeing, the perfect portrait shattered forever. Evelyn Rothschild Kwan was taken into custody before she could leave the courtroom, her silk dress suddenly looking like a shroud. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood once more, feeling the bracelet my mother made press against my wrist like a heartbeat that had never stopped. I accept no titles, no awards, no government contracts, I said, and my voice carried to every corner of the room. All assets seized from Stonehaven and Ether will be used to establish the Coastal Reconstruction Fund. The money that poisoned our water will now clean it, power our homes, and rebuild the future our children deserve. I looked at Marcus then, and he nodded, eyes shining with something that looked very much like peace. The fight was over. Justice had arrived, not in gold or glory, but in the slow, patient work of mothers and daughters and grandmothers who had never stopped believing that love is heavier than any lie. The sun was just beginning to set over the coast when I walked to the site alone, the way I do every evening now. Mac was finishing the last connection on the new solar array. Children ran between the towers, chasing fireflies that danced around the clean white lights that had just come on for the first time. Their laughter rose like music, the kind of sound that washes everything else away. I knelt in the sand, rolled up my sleeves, and helped Mac tighten the final bolt. Our hands brushed. He smiled, small and real. No words. None needed. A little girl with braids tugged my sleeve. "Tita Mika, look!" She pointed to her house. The porch light glowed steady, bright. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms open, tears shining on her cheeks. I stood up and looked around. The water was clear. The air smelled of salt and hope. Marcus was there too, pushing his daughter on the new swing we built yesterday. He met my eyes and nodded. Just once. A simple thank you that carried everything. I touched the bracelet on my wrist. It no longer felt tight. The shells were smooth now, worn soft by time and healing. I took a deep breath. The ocean was calm. My heart was calm. The fight was over. The healing had come. And it was enough. I smiled, turned my face to the warm light, and for the first time in years, I simply let myself be happy. My dearest mothers, grandmothers, sisters, come close, let me speak softly, the way we speak when the house is quiet and the heart is full. The story is finished. The lights are on. The children are laughing. And I am here. Still the same Mika who once walked barefoot to school, now sitting alone with only this little screen between us. Did the story touch your heart the way it touched mine while I lived it? Tell me. Where are you watching from tonight? Which city? Which little corner of the world holds you right now? Drop your name, your province, your country in the comments. I read every single one. And when I see, from Davao, from Lima, from Lagos, from a small barangay in Quezon. My eyes fill with tears because I know I am not alone. If this story gave you even one moment of comfort, one spark of hope that justice does come, even when it is late, please leave a heart, a simple, "I've been through that, too," or send a super thanks, even the smallest one. Every peso, every dollar, every coin you give helps me keep telling these stories for mothers who wait alone at night, just like you. On your screen right now, you will see 2 new real-life stories I prepared with all my love. Stories of women who rose from nothing and made the powerful tremble. Watch them. Share them with your daughters, your sisters, your friends who need to remember they are never too small to win. There are hundreds more stories waiting on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so we never lose each other. Thank you for staying with me until the sun set and the lights came on. Thank you for every tear, every prayer, every blessing you left in the comments. I am hugging you right now tight, the way we hug when words are no longer enough. See you in the next story, my beautiful ones. With all my love and respect, Mika.